Welcome everyone to what I'm lovingly calling our Future Forum. My name is Rivkah Sass, and I'm the Lame Duck Library Director for Sacramento Public Library. And I'm here with four amazing people because it's a constant conversation that we have been having, some of us who've known each other a long time for more than 20 years, and others of us may be newer to the conversation, but just want to talk a little bit about the future of libraries, especially, I don't know about you, but our library's been working through a pandemic for the last couple of years, and that's changed a few things. So with no further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists. And I'm doing it in alphabetical order because I'm still a librarian. Christy Aguirre. Christy, you want to wave to the crowd? Christy Aguirre is a library supervisor 3 with the Sacramento Public Library. But before becoming a librarian, I think she had the most interesting job probably in the virtual room. She was a shoe store manager and a visual arts coordinator for a department store, which included dressing mannequins. She began her library career in 1998 with the Los Gatos Public Library and has also worked at San Jose Public, San Jose State Academic, and now Sacramento Public Library for about the last 13 years. And she is the Energizer Bunny extraordinaire at Sacramento Public Library. But before that, she was at San Jose, and she helped coordinate the grand opening celebration of the joint facility, the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Library, managed volunteers for the Guinness Book of World Records Reading Out Loud Challenge. Do they still hold the world record?
No, about a year later, some girls in Germany beat a record by 2 hours.
Shocking. So Christy's been with us since 2008, starting as a youth services library at our Elk Grove Library, which was our first branch to have RFID technology. She also drove a bookmobile for a while, has been a branch supervisor now for several years, implemented our Veterans Resource Station at the Southgate Library, and also began our partnership with For Our Friends, also known as the Street Vets, who provide free veterinary care for our unhoused neighbors, as well as people who have trouble paying for the very expensive vet bills that we all can accumulate. She is, I have to add this, Christy also is the woman who we send in to do the cleanup. She is amazing at organizing and cleaning up libraries where there have been longtime staff who let things accumulate. She's a former Library Journal mover and shaker, and also participated in the American Library Association Leadership Institute. She manages and coordinates a lot of system-wide teams at Sacramento Public Library, and thank you, Christy, for being here.
Thank you.
Stacy Aldrich is the Hawaii State Librarian. She's got more than 20 years of experience in libraries, also served as the Deputy Secretary for the Office of Commonwealth Libraries in Pennsylvania, which I think has more libraries than almost any other state in the Union, like hundreds, and has worked both in public and academic libraries. She also served as a bona fide futurist with the think tank of Coates and Jarrett in Washington, D.C., which helped her to hone her futurist thinking skills to the benefit of libraries throughout our little world of librarianship. Always curious and always learning, she believes we all should have a little futurist in us so that we can create our preferred futures. Peter Coyle, okay, drum roll, applause. Peter Coyle is the brand new library director and CEO of Sacramento Public Library. He's been here a week and a half. He's had to put up with me. I'm working from home because He's got the office, and boy, do I like that. Peter was previously director of the Montclair Public Library in New Jersey and the central library manager at Dallas Public Libraries, a system which also has 28 locations, just like Sacramento. And he is vice president of the Freedom to Read Foundation and a member of ALA's Intellectual Freedom Committee. He serves on ALA Council as the Intellectual Freedom Roundtable Counselor representative, right? He's a frequent presenter at regional, state, and national library workshops, webinars, and conferences, training librarians on a wide variety of professional issues. He's been interviewed and quoted in major media outlets, including National Public Radio, the Huffington Post, Forbes, Publishers Weekly, Library Journal, and American Libraries. Last but not least, and only with the letter E in her last name, is Lori Easterwood. Lori is the City of Folsom's Library Director and homelessness liaison. I sure would like to hear more about that. In 2015, she was a Library Journal mover and shaker, recognized for her incredibly innovative library programming geared toward people in their 20s and 30s. Prior to Folsom, Lori was a programming and partnerships coordinator for Sacramento Public Library, where she said helped create the Library of Things. I credit her with the idea, wrote the grant, managed the grant, and made it all happen for our Library Unexpected project. She also very well might be the only librarian in our area to deliver programs at every single library location in Sacramento County. For those of you who don't know, Folsom is in Sacramento County, but they are an independent library. So I believe that is true, Lori. Thank you and welcome to all of you. And I'm thrilled that you're here. And thank you for making my second to last day as a librarian one where we can actually have a conversation about something that is so important. And that is, what is the future of libraries? Do we have a future? And what's next for libraries? So I'll start maybe with a question, but I actually would like to give you each about 5 minutes to say anything you want about the future of libraries. So do we have to do it in alphabetical order? Does anybody want to start? I'd like to hear that, and then I have some question prompts.
Well, I guess I might as well start, Rivkah, because I think there's a lot of expertise on this panel. I would say that right now it's very hard as a futurist thinker to really visualize libraries in the future because our constant present state of where we're at right now, we're constantly changing. But I definitely believe that libraries are positioned to have a huge impact in our communities. And I'm super excited because we've kind of come to realize that there does need to be a physical or in-person space, or we do need to hold space with one another. And I'm reminded of that right now because at North Atomas Library, we're right next to a high school. And we need, the school-age kids need in-person programming or in-person learning. And I really believe that if anything else, COVID has really reminded us that there is added value when we have in-person programming. Not that all of the wonderful things that we're doing online don't count. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that we're really aware more now than ever of this sacred space that we call library space. And I believe the future of library, if we can get our ducks in a row, we are really going to forge forward in the future. But I'm sure the rest of the panel has a lot to say about that.
Thank you. Who'd like to go next?
Rivkah, I will. I
you.
think if anything, I think the future is going to be very different, obviously, right? But I think for me, at least, the pandemic has helped me to better understand other people's situations. Knowing what it's like to be home alone for weeks at a time, I can sympathize more with our users who are homebound, and those who really depend on the library for their services. It's not something intellectually I understood, but having experienced it now. So I really think the future of libraries is going to be, it's always been compassionate, but I think we're going to see a lot more buy-in in terms of inclusion, because I think our perspectives have all changed. And if we're going to look for a silver lining from all this tumult and the unfortunately the loss of life the last couple of years, I hope it's going to be a more compassionate profession. And we always are focusing outward, but I think it's going to hone that a little bit more. And I've already seen that starting already. So I'm grateful for that.
Thank you.
I'll go
Stacy,
next.
Lori? Okay.
Oh, I'm afraid I'm going to go a little dark, so I want to not end on
Uh-oh.
that. So I think the future of libraries is going to be incredibly tied up with future of the planet and climate change. So I feel like we're going to get roped in the same way we have with the pandemic into being disaster response. I grew up 20 miles from Mayfield, Kentucky, and their library is closed. It was not destroyed, but it has been a FEMA disaster recovery command center since the tornado. So I think that we'll probably have periods where we get back to our core services, but then continue to be utilized in a really dynamic way to help with, all of these disasters. And if the planet as a whole and if we decide to really try to address the problems with climate change, I think libraries are an excellent model for sharing. And, that's why I was always excited about the library things, which was a branding thing, honestly. But, I think the sharing economy, we've got that dialed in and it can be so much help. So it's a little dark, but also good.
I don't think that's dark at all. I think it's realistic, Lori. I mean, part of your title is homelessness liaison, which I still want to hear more about. Stacy.
Well, how far in the future are we talking? Because
well, that's a question that will come up later.
We're talking 3 years. I think I agree. I'm honored to be on this panel. First of all, thank you for inviting me to join you all and to celebrate your career and your next adventures, wrapping up one and beginning new. I think the future is different for every library. And I don't think we can say the future of a library is, because every community is different. And so when I think about the future of libraries, I really think about, do we have the skills that we need to pay attention and to be in touch with our communities? William Gibson said that the future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed. And I think that's true. So I think when we broadly say what the future is, I think we have to think about our communities. And I think about Polynesian voyagers, when they would sail on the oceans, they would use the stars and the sky to help direct them, but they would also use frigate birds. They would release the birds, and if they came back, then that meant there was no land. If they didn't come back, there was land. And I feel like we have to use those, we have to keep looking up and out and looking for the opportunities that meet the mission of what we do as libraries. And we have to use all those tools to keep reinventing or shifting the kinds of services that we're providing based on where we are. I think it's hard to say everybody is, like the future is. That's another profession. I think you can make a lot of money if you're really good at it. Being a psychic, right? Thank you.
It's a great point. But and I think we have a related question that I'm hoping you'll address in a bit. But I first want to talk about what for me is the elephant in the room, and that is the almost last 2 years of, COVID. I wonder, it started as COVID-19. When we get to COVID 87, I think we really have a problem. But thanks to COVID, there have been opportunities. So what opportunities have you seen that have presented themselves that maybe you had talked about in your libraries or here, doesn't matter, about implementing that that you think are here to stay?
Rivkah, I definitely think like, and as Peter mentioned, for those people that can't get into the library, or maybe they're economically challenged, and we really do need to offer still some form of online story times, online homework zone for people that can't really make it into the library. I think that those have been wonderful things. I mean, really, it feels like this last 2-3 years have just been, SPL's been able to pivot on a dime. And it's really amazing how much of our programming that we got online before a lot of other libraries did. And we have a fantastic crew. And I definitely think that some of those things will stay online. But again, you know, I'm really looking towards the future and opening back up, you know, on the physical space level too. But those are the things that I think that are here to stay, is like some of the online book clubs, story times, homework zone, those types of programs for people that can't get into the library.
I think Rivkah, a lot of the, like Christy said, a lot of the technology I think is here to stay. A lot of libraries that talked about lending hotspots and Chromebooks or laptops, I think they've been able to make the case now. But I pivot a little bit away from the question, and I think that the libraries that are larger, that have larger staff and larger funding, had an easier time pivoting. They had the resources to do it. And I think we've seen the inequities in how libraries are funded across this country. I think the future of libraries is really dependent on our elected officials funding libraries adequately. You know, the 80% of libraries in America serve less than 30,000 people. That's a lot. That's a lot of small little libraries. So I think the things that we've implemented, it's going to take government assistance. It's going to take national broadband. It's going to take programs through state libraries to get technology passed through that federal funding to the smaller libraries. But I think the technology aspect is here to stay. Virtual programs, hybrid programs. I think those things are the way that we make the library easy to use. Which is another topic for another webinar, that we as professionals make it too hard to use our libraries. We've made it easier, and I think that's a good thing. It's here to stay.
That's great to hear. Lori, Stacy, do you have thoughts about this?
We're a little behind the times out in Folsom, but you know, we did have to make the best of losing half of our on-call budget, which paid for much of our services, and that's still gone. So we went to a one desk. I know that Sac Public switched to a one desk model back during the economic depression, and that has been really good here. The staff do not love it, I will tell you that, but it allows us to be open more hours than we would otherwise. And I think that is something that's here to stay. And I can't imagine going back to spending the money. Currently, you know, we've got half the number of people coming in that we used to, and hopefully that will change. But that's been, you know, I wanted to do it when I got here, but I didn't have the courage. So that's been like a slight silver lining. But I'm kind of a contrarian when it comes to the online events. You know, I didn't go all in on that. We did story times, but we stopped them the minute we could, and we got back to doing in-person story times. Those are now on pause again because it became, you know, very frightening. But it was great to see people do respond well to the online programming. It was wonderful when we were everybody was so isolated, but it was great to see people coming back in. You know, when Christy mentioned seeing those kids coming into the high school, it's pretty transformative to see how much people appreciate what we do.
It's true.
I think so. Hawaii is a little behind too. And a little different. We did virtual programs, but people didn't really connect with them. So as soon as we can be outside, people go outside here. So virtual programming is not as exciting unless it's things like genealogy or programs that people were looking for that we couldn't offer in person. So we're being, I think, I think the mix, finding the balance between the services of physical and digital is going to continue. Here, we finally saw the tipping point for using our digital resources. People were learning more about what the library actually had. And we finally hit 1 million circs of ebooks. So we joined the Million Circ ebook club. So I think that balance is still going to be there for us. I think quick services are going to be hard for us to give up, where you can make an appointment to pick up stuff if you don't really want to have to come in and look in the library. I think people like that. That has to change the model, the way we think about our staffing. And I do think that having plans or phases for how you deal with emergency situations like COVID, where you can fluidly move back and forth with the services that you actually have, is going to continue. And we're going to have to keep planning even better to make our services fluid. So even if we have to shut down or we can only go to door service, that it's easy and that people still have access, because that access means so much to people in our communities.
I think that's a great point, and it sort of feeds into the next question from my perspective. And it's the one that I don't know about you, but I think about a lot. And I think about, curbside is here to stay probably. And I think about the young parent who may be at home. I have a neighbor who's an at-home dad. If he wants to pick up library books, it would be a lot easier to be able to pull up, grab your bag and leave. So those kinds of things I think we have to also think about. But what skills do we need to be building and developing in our staff so that we can be future ready? And what obstacles do we face in getting there? And come on, give it to me.
I'll dive in. I'll dive in. That's okay, Christy, or do you want to go?
Oh, no, go ahead, Stacy.
Thank you. So again, another quote, because I have favorite quotes that are about future, but Alvin Toffler once wrote, the illiterate of the future will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And that, I think, is crucial for us to be able to do. And it's a challenge because we are creatures of habit and we like ritual. And I don't think we can move forward if we, as quickly as we need to, as the future changes, if we can't learn, unlearn, and relearn. So I think the first thing we have to become is really good learners. And are we all prepared as adults for learning all the time and letting go of stuff that we don't need anymore so that we can move forward? I really think that's the most crucial. If we can't do that, we're going to be stuck.
Sorry, Christy. I was going to ditto to that because I had this conversation with my husband, and basically I was thinking adaptability. My husband's also a librarian. That's the biggest skill, but he was saying it's not a skill, it's a trait. So, I did some research and we can learn it. So, but you said it so much better, Stacey. Thank you.
Well, and I'll just piggyback off of all of that because I really thought about this question. And I think that two of the skills that we really need, and the one I wanted to focus on most, was resilience. I think resilience is a special skill, and it really just what Stacy said about being flexible, really being able to be flexible. I definitely think that but these skills need to be based on values, our underlying values of our organizations, of our libraries. We need to have competent library staff, but we need to move forward with the conscience and compassion. And I think that the obstacle to doing this is compassion fatigue. I mean, most of us got into libraries because we care about reading, we care about the public, we care about the mission of the library. But I think that the obstacles that we face right now, especially, are compassion fatigue and burnout. And, I want all of staff to be in it for the long haul. even though Rivkah's leaving us, but she's been in it for the long haul. But I want us to really focus on organizational care, the care of our organization and the care of each other. And so there's plenty of webinars and books and stress and burnout and all of that. But I really do think that libraries as organizations need to focus on the care of their library staff from an organizational level. And I know that's more of an ethical way of thinking, but that's what I think is definitely needed.
Peter, do you want the last word?
I was thinking about this too, and I think we also have to reimagine what and how we do it. We talk about librarians. I think that the conversations about library workers, and what is the role of a librarian versus the other people in staff? Do you need a master's degree to help someone print a resume? And I think we need to reimagine the duties and how we approach things. I know that's a little heretical, I'm sure, to some, but I've thought a lot about just in terms of the profession and barriers to access and making sure we have a diverse profession. And I'm not so sure we need a master's degree to be a librarian. Maybe it needs to be a bachelor's degree. Maybe the master's needs to be more of a management track. And so in terms of future of libraries, I think we have to look at our structure and who's in the library. Are we representative of our communities, and those sorts of things, and talk about who's not on our staff and why aren't they on our staff. And I think that's another part of the future, is making sure that we are still representative, or not still, that we are better representative of, because we're not representative of our communities. And I think we have to have those hard conversations. And that doesn't devalue the master's degree. I think it just needs to be honed. Things have changed. We're in the future where it was 50 years ago. Like we have to adapt, and we have to not be stuck in the past to be future focused.
Excellent point. Excellent point. So can we talk a little bit more about obstacles? Because I think I think it's a great vision, but I think there are obstacles, and it goes back to how I know for the folks out there listening, we've been dragging Peter from library to library the last week, visiting all the locations. And it thrills me when I walk in one of our branches, they've been growing staff from the community who, kids who were coming into game became volunteers, became shelvers. Now we have two permanent, 2 career staff, I believe 2. It's a small number in a system our size, but it's that door that opens that I find really exciting. And it's that, going back to Stacy's quote, it's that willingness to learn and relearn and think about what people need. Thank you. But obstacles. Did we miss anything?
I think we can be our own obstacle, to tell you the truth. I feel like sometimes we get trapped in thinking that we don't have power, we don't have say, and power is what you demand. And I don't mean power in like a money grabbing or like a mean I don't know, Dr. Evil kind of way. I mean a way in that people recognize the impact that we're making every day on our communities. And I think one of those obstacles can be that we try to do everything for everybody and people forget who we are. And so we get lost, because when you try to describe what a library is and you're like, and we do this and we do that, and we have this service and this service, the words we're using, people are like, oh, okay. And then it becomes the paradox of choice. There's too much going on. I don't know what a library is anymore. So I think what's really important for us to do, we have to get over that obstacle. We have to have the right words to help simplify the role we play, and then we can do all the other things. So I use words like connecting. We collect and we connect. And that can be anything, right? We collect people, we collect parts and communities to connect people to the resources they need. So I think our words and our ability to simplify what it is we do without trying to give people the litany of all the things we do is a huge barrier. And I think if we can change that and simplify it, then people can identify what a public library is.
I think that's a great point. And I think it's easy, you know, a lot of libraries, and we certainly were one of them, participated and really owned the Harwood, you know, looking outward, is that and, you know, we know there are adults who need support in learning, talk about learning, whether it's, you know, I'm very passionate about, obviously, about the ability to offer high school diplomas. I'm passionate about people learning about the job skill building opportunities we have. So those are the kinds of things that, you know, like, what does your community need? And I don't know that we still have embraced that as fully and as completely as we should, to Peter's point. And it would help if we also then can bring more people from the community into our libraries to tell the story, to tell that story. Sorry, I'm not supposed to be talking. I'm supposed to be moderating, but this is so interesting. Thank you. So I'm going to skip what I think is the next question and instead talk about some trends that bother me a little bit. And I'm not sure I'm asking the question in quite the right way, but I see challenges. Our board is different. We're different. We have elected officials. Peter gets to work, report to 15 elected officials throughout Sacramento City and County. I think that's a great governance model, because you are working for the people who work for the people, right? But not all libraries are doing that. There are challenges happening all around the country to library boards, and whether it's being elected to library boards or being appointed to library boards, where some of the core values of librarianship, like intellectual freedom, like open access, like equity, EDI, right? All those are a little bit under fire. Is this the future? And how do we respond to it?
Rivkah, I hope it's not the future. This is where advocacy, you know, as a branch supervisor, one of the things I was doing before when I wasn't moving around so much and really working closer with the Friends group. Right now, it's a little bit more difficult. But in advocacy, library advocacy, you know, forwarding all those emails that come in about, you know, elected officials and contacting your congressman. And we need to vote people out that don't align with open access and equity. I mean, that's our core. I just can't imagine the library without thinking of these things like intellectual freedom and diversity and open access and equity. We need to make everything, we need to get these candidates just out of the way. I mean, I don't see how we are, you know, we keep voting for people like this. And I don't know how that is, except to work closely with the Friends groups as a supervisor. I'm sure that the rest of the panel has other ideas, but definitely just promoting advocacy wherever we can, library advocacy.
I think this is, and maybe this is off the mark, but I think what we're seeing is the result of the lack of school librarians in schools. People have not been trained how to have information literacy, so they then read or hear something which is not totally true, and they agree with it, and it's just perpetuated. So I unfortunately, unless and this is oversimplifying for sure, but I do think that unless we get more school librarians and teach our children how to be intellectually smart, and that's maybe an oxymoron or whatever. Words are not coming this morning. I think we have not given the current generation the necessary skills to have critical thinking. And what we're seeing is that erosion of that basic understanding. And so a lot of what we're seeing are boards being taken over by people who think they know what critical race theory is. Well, pointing out systemic racism is, it's gotten muddied, and people don't understand what it is they're actually fighting for or against. So I think we have an issue that is going to, unfortunately, I think, be with us for a while until our elected school boards and our elected officials put money in our schools and public libraries, but we need school librarians. And I think we've seen the erosion of that.
I agree with Peter and Christy. I also think that our biggest challenge is taking the time to create relationships with people, even the ones that don't agree with us. I think if you don't know people, you're not going to be able to have the kinds of conversations that you need to have where you have concerns. So when we have boards where we have people who are coming in with very different value system, it's time to go out to lunch with them a lot and to show them examples of things that are happening and why they're important. So I think relationship building is at the top of the list for all of this. We've moved away from it. I'm one of those people, I'm sorry, I don't use Facebook. I realize the benefits of social media, but I also see how social media is used in a way to misinform and for people not to be honest and open with each other in respectful ways. And it hasn't happened yet, but I guess I used to say, well, in the grocery store, somebody's not going to like bowl you over with their cart. But that was before the pandemic. So I don't know, it might be different now, but.
You have not been to the East Sacramento Trader Joe's.
But I do think that misinformation is huge and it spreads so quickly and it's hard to pull back. So we have to be very careful with the information we put out and how we're represented. And we have to build really good relationships with people of all, different understandings of things so that we can better understand, why don't you believe this? Like, what is the real issue? Like, why do you think this book should not be on the shelf? Like, what's the real crux of, is it fear? What do you think will happen if this, book is on the shelf? So we just, I'd say relationships. Mm-hmm.
Can I make a plug for a book that I believe everyone should read this year? It was my favorite nonfiction book of 2021, and that is The Power of Strangers. It is a remarkable book, and it honestly, I've probably bought 6 copies and given it away because I think it's so important for us to have that dialogue. I mean, as Peter will discover, our board is very diverse in their perspectives, in their opinions about things. It's important to be able to have those conversations and do it in a way that that includes civility, right? So, Lori, did you want to have the last word on this question?
Oh, just similar things. I don't think it's the future. I think it's the present. It's just the degrees of where we're at. I've been lucky out here in Folsom because I don't think my body can physically handle any more rage, but one of the things that I used to do pre-pandemic was anytime I got a book request to have it removed, I would have the person come back in my office and we'd have a cup of tea. So that was like, that diffuses so many situations because you can't yell at somebody while you're like being hospitable. So I think that, much of what Stacey was saying is the same kind of thing. If we know these folks, they're not going to engage in the same way. So you can actually get to some level of understanding. So.
I hope so. I hope so. We're going to come back to a question that kind of again relates to this, but let's do a little forecasting, could we? So it's 2032. What do libraries look like? Stacey, and on full disclosure, Stacey, I would give anything to have that video from whatever it was, 1999. Do you have it?
The 89 one or the one we did in Omaha?
No, the one we did at an ALA midwinter where we went around with a video camera and asked people if libraries would exist in 20 years. It was 2000, Washington, DC. But
No,
that's another story.
It was left in Maryland.
Yeah. So we're 10 years down the road. And what do you think? What do libraries look like?
Well,
Do they still exist?
I say they still exist. And I'm definitely going to use the rest of my career to fight for that. But I think that libraries, like Lori kind of said it earlier, the disaster preparedness. I mean, I took environmental ethics so many years ago, over 16, 17 years ago. And the magic number was 2030. What's going to happen in 2030 if we don't, start worrying about our planet? And I always think of that in conjunction with libraries. So I think Lori's right. I think that we need to really take a hard look at our facilities. And I think we'll wind up merging with a lot of other civic departments, like community centers, disaster preparedness places. I love the Roseville Public Library because all of their seating folds out into beds in case they need to become a place where a shelter in place. That's the kind of thinking, it seems to me, that is going to be, we're talking even 10 years from now. So yeah, Lori, it was interesting that you said that because I had thought about that for this question. Anyway.
That's great.
We're going to be building a new library out here in Folsom sometime in the next 15 years, 10 to 15 years. So already we're planning a bit to have it co-located with community center, get some of that space off of the library's ownership, so that we can just use those spaces and really focus on the books and everything inside the facility. So I think that some libraries could end up being smaller, more bookstore-like, and then having some of those spaces that can be used for multiple uses with other agencies. And if this library doesn't have carpet in 10 years, I'm in so much trouble. I've got a sign back there that's been up here since I started. We've got to have carpet and paint. So very physically, I hope we get some deferred maintenance going.
That is an entire program in and of itself for all of us who work in libraries. Peter, Stacey?
I think we're seeing that a little bit, that the footprint of or the idea of a library as a warehouse of books has changed and continues to change. The size of our collection is probably going to be smaller. We've already pivoted a lot of libraries away from the giant reference collections, and I think we're going to see probably a lot more of that. And that's not to negate the importance of books. I think that's still our bread and butter. It's going to be our bread and butter. But the idea of books as the only place for information is going to be different. I think we're going to be probably more tech heavy than we are now. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But I think the footprint of our library is going to be shrinking from more books to more gathering education spaces.
I like the question that Chance had put in the chat about what information needs will people have in 2032 and what role will libraries play. And I think the additional question is, what is our community going to look like in 10 years? Or so in Hawaii, we have 51 branches on 6 islands, and there is a difference on each island. and in each local library. So I think what we have to keep looking at is how are our communities changing and where are those needs? I honestly don't know in 10 years exactly what we're going to look like. I think we're going to have libraries. I absolutely think we're going to have libraries, but the kinds of services that we're going to be providing, I think we're still going to be connecting people. I really do believe that the whole role of a public library has been connecting people. It's human connections. A book is just a technology to transmit information. Technology is just another form of transmission, so of information. So what role will we play in the physical and the digital of connecting people? And in some communities, it's going to be one thing, in another, it's going to be very different. I do think the one thing we have to pay attention to as we think about the future is ritual. Ritual is what drives people to use your spaces, to use the things that you do. And as humans, we like homeostasis, we like ritual. And so I'll be curious, as the pandemic, how long is it going? I mean, are we going to return to old rituals because we've missed them? Or what are the new rituals that we're going to be building that help our communities and serve our communities?
Wow, that's pretty powerful. I'm just thinking about, I'm a grandma. It's one of the reasons I want to stop working full time. And my 2-year-old grandson's first question every time we FaceTime is, Nana, will we go to the library? Right? Because he knows that that's a ritual we have when I visit. And I think, for me, that's very old school, but it's that power. It is about a power of connection. And I think that's so important. So let's talk about, all right, maybe it is 10 years. Did everybody have a chance to answer the question? I want to make sure we're good. This is one I really want to know because you alluded to it. All of you kind of alluded to this about space and size. So we've just been given the funds to build a joint facility with an agency, public, private, anything you want. What would you do?
Rivkah, I'm going to be outrageous here.
I expect nothing less, Christy.
Okay, well, I mean, in my dream of all dreams, and in thinking about services to the transient population and how impactful our For Our Friends group is, I say we partner with an animal shelter and we have a joint use facility with a dog run. We have therapy dogs for staff and for people in the community. We have programs to have certification programs for therapy dogs and service dogs. I happen to have a daughter in a wheelchair, and it is very difficult to partner up with a service dog. What a wonderful thing for a library to be that kind of learning opportunity and, certification programs. And I would love for these trained therapy dogs and service animals to be able to visit children's hospitals, bookmobile programs, and being able to take books out at the same time. So kind of a marriage of a read to the dog program, but on a really grand scale.
I love it. I love it. Who's next?
I envision a complex that has really truly a social service complex, Head Start, daycare, library, social services, all in one area, with, maybe the meeting room isn't the library, maybe the meeting room is what connects all these places together as kind of the hub. But I think that make it easy for people to get what they need. Why do we need to, and we see this in other towns where they have government complexes which have the police and fire next to each other. Well, why aren't we doing that with libraries and all the other places? Why is it so unusual that the library, now I love going to a town and driving past the main street into the library, love it. But let's make the other resources as easy to find.
That's great. Lori, Stacy?
I had another kind of out there one, because this is just, like I said, we're actually going to partner with the community center and everything. But in my brain, wouldn't it be cool to partner with a recycling agency like TerraCycle to create a whole new ritual of coming in? Like, people love bringing their batteries into the library. They love it. Like, how much other stuff could you do? When I was at SPL, I had a whole plan to, it was crazy, to have a composting program out of one of the libraries, and you would bring your compost and take away books. So, something like that could be a lot of fun.
I love it. I love it. Stacy?
When I read the question, the first thing that popped into my mind was Trader Joe's. And that was because it would be convenient for lunch for everybody. But given the other amazing ideas, it seems sort of, flirty. But I think I thought about Trader Joe's because I think they're innovative in how they think about products. I think they're innovative in how they think about services. The only thing is, I think they're focused on a certain group, and I guess that would be a community. So again, what kind of library would I build in different communities based on having anything? I think here, I would think about building a library that is actually built around the values of Native Hawaiian culture. We're organized in ways that are very Western. Our spaces are designed in very traditional ways. And we've been doing some work here in a project called Hui Kolu, which is a group of 3, where we were working with our Native Hawaiian libraries and really asking the question, what does a library that holds the values and the culture of Hawaii look like? And so I think that would have a lot of ramifications for the types of collections we might have, for the types of people in the community that would be a part of that space. I think these are all great ideas that are absolutely doable. Honestly, I think they're wonderful ideas. And the part about having social services in one area, we've been talking with some of the other agencies. People, it's hard if you have no resources and you have to get on a bus and you have to get to certain places on time, and you got to run all over, and people aren't always nice. I think the library is definitely that place that could have even just a digital, like a little booth that's your support booth, and you can go in and connect to a live person from whatever agency. You don't have to get on a bus or figure out how to get somewhere. So I think there are ways we can actually partner with not actually being like in the same physical space.
There are so many things I want to say, and I know Kathy Crosswaite, who's monitoring the chat and the questions, is applauding right now, because you're touching on the idea of mobile services. You're touching on the idea of getting out to the people where they are. You're touching on the idea of what if libraries could actually provide car sharing, those kinds of things. So it's, so many things, but we're actually running out of time, and we have some questions in the Q&A. And folks, if you have a question, don't put it in the chat, put it in the Q&A. And we're going to start with a question from Arthur that goes back to the beginning, that says, I'm delighted to hear Lori address climate change head on. As climate change increasingly disrupts everyone's lives, how will libraries help people navigate this long emergency? For example, might SPL and other libraries make climate change related databases and resources, e.g. EBSCO Green File, available to our communities? Anybody want to tackle that?
I'm very anti-database because I don't think they get used.
Thank you for calling the elephant in the room.
I've gotten rid of almost all of them. I do think that having that information would be incredibly important. I've never heard of EBSCO Green File. So I think that's probably the problem with databases. the long emergency of climate change. I think, like Christy was saying, we have to be ready for when it comes. You know, we had a fire just down the road. There were libraries that were evacuation centers. You know, do we have the ability to respond in that way when our community needs us? And then the education around the problem. I try to sneak it in as much as possible in a fun way. You know, there've been a lot of book to action programs that I've done that have had climate change as their root, but that's me for now.
I can attest to that. And
I think as we build buildings and do things, as we set the example by making sure we have, you know, the highest LEED certifications and providing these resources to, you know, making sure we're as green as possible. And I think that's a real key thing as we can be a leader in that industry. But I do think, you know, Arthur made a good point. You know, we have to be providing information. And how many environmental programs have we done in the last year at our library? You know, have we done our part to bring in that, to be part of that conversation? And I think we have to be providing, even if it's not a database, you know, we have to make sure we're providing programs about that topic so that we can help educate our communities. And you know, I can't answer that question because I've only been here, you know, less than 2 weeks. But I would hope that we're making an effort to have environmental programs or programs about how to be more environmentally friendly as often as we can.
thank you. Stacy? Oh, sorry.
Sorry. No, I think it's also really thinking about how we take things into the library, the life cycle of everything we buy, from technology to books, and what happens to all those things. And we've been consumers for so long, and now there's so much stuff. And I know in libraries we like to hoard, but what can we do with the stuff? And as we take on new technologies, as we take on new spaces, what's the life cycle of what it is that we're purchasing, and how are we, what is the plan for end of life, if there is an end of life, so that we're contributing in a positive way to even what we're consuming as libraries for the community.
That's great. Shall we move on to the next? Anything else? Okay, so this is an interesting question. This is from Henry. What is the potential for public libraries to own the means of production in terms of media production, publishing, water power generation, food production, i.e. radical, multifaceted sustainability kind of relates to this. So
I can, you know, I was just I have a neighbor, his name is Pippin, and he just left the Smithsonian magazine on my doorstep with a little note to read this article. This was from November 21, and it's called New Chapter, and it talks about a library in Memphis, Tennessee that has this amazing technology center for teens. And so they have their own recording studio. And Memphis, Tennessee, the Benjamin Hooks Central Library is one of the poorest in the whole country. But somehow they got to get all these funds to make this. They also have their own TV station and radio station, which is, wow, how amazing be if we had our teens, just like at a college library, have their own teen library, a radio station right out of the library. I mean, we have so many opportunities in joint facilities. I'm thinking of Indercombe High School over here. These kids, I mean, we really could give them something to do and how to really actively participate. It would just be phenomenal. I just read this article and I was so inspired by the ideas there and what they've implemented. So I think this is where the future of libraries is going, definitely.
absolutely. And we just installed a studio in our Martin Luther King Jr. library. And it's, you know, it's unfortunately the staff person who was most connected to getting it installed left for another job. And now we have to think about what's next for that. Okay, we're in the interest of time. I'm going to move on to what's the most important thing. This is from Christy. What's the most important thing we can do to prove our relevance to the public who may not know what we have to offer?
Again, I think it comes down to building relationships. People who don't know what we have to offer, we have to find ways to create relationships, to get to know people, understand who they are, and help them see how they fit into the library story, or see how we fit into their story. I think the challenge is, which is really interesting. I mean, if you use the library all the time, you know what libraries are. The people who don't use libraries are usually people like, oh, we don't need libraries, I can get it all on my phone. But when you really start to show them examples, or you bring people in and they see what it is that you have, all of a sudden they start to get excited because they realize the library can be something different. So I think it goes back to a relationship building in the communities, and finding ways to get to know people better so that we can better understand their story and help them understand how the library can fit into it.
I think, Rivkah, we don't do a good enough job of marketing and advertising ourselves. If you're going to go buy a house, you go to a realtor. Everyone knows this, but yet the realtors still have commercials on TV telling you to go see a realtor. What ends money, right? We don't have the money to do that, but why aren't there commercials telling people, hey, go to the library for story time? And it could be generic national advertising. It doesn't have to be specific to go to Sacramento Public Library. But that hasn't happened. And ALA has tried to do that here and there with some other campaigns, and they've been kind of successful, but there hasn't been a national marketing campaign about just libraries.
Right.
And that needs to happen.
I've always wanted to steal that clip from Good Will Hunting when he has the encounter with the guy from Harvard, and he talks about, I did that, you did it, it took you $150,000 education. I got it for $1.50 in library cards, or library fines, but anyway, sorry. Others? Hey, thank you, Sarah. I'm sorry I didn't get to see your face. Other comments? Okay, let's move on to, I like this from Chance. Please comment on how library workers can move this conversation from operational improvements to anticipating and acting with the future in mind. Social workers have a model we should mimic, and Chance put it in. It's socialworkhealthfutureslab.org/blog. So if you haven't seen that, so comments?
It's making thinking about the future part of our work ritual, not as something extra that we do or something we go and we listen to other speakers. It can be difficult to start. Our staff, some of our staff have been to the Future School, University of Connecticut. If you've had a chance, they have a few seats left open, contact them. A few of our staff went. We haven't fully been able to focus, but that's the goal for 2022, is to create some ritual where we spend some time, because I think it's how we parcel our time. We say we never have enough time, we can't get things done. If that's the case, then we have to make time to do things. And I think we all have to really start making time to think about the future, have an hour, even if it's an hour a week, where people get together and talk about something interesting that they saw, and what does it mean? And are there implications for the libraries? Then we have to do it. So I think we need to create future ritual in all of our libraries, including my own.
I like that.
I would agree with that. I definitely think that on a day-to-day basis now, especially because I'm always trying to think ahead, like what's coming around the corner. I think that as libraries, just all library staff, we just need to be really intentional about anything that we plan on doing as in thinking in terms of as we open back up as an organization post-pandemic or living with the pandemic, how is that going to look? And really to be very supportive of one another and to listen to each other's ideas with the future in mind. And I'm just so excited that we're having this talk today, Rivkah. Thank you so much. Because it's putting it on the forefront. And I think that it needs to be our focus. And yeah, I agree with what both Stacy and Peter have just said. So thank you.
Thank you. I think this is so, we can't stop thinking about it. As a library user, moving from librarian to library user, I want you guys to stick around. Now I'll have more time to read. So, okay, we have a question from Anonymous. I agree with Peter's comments about pooling resources and addressing inclusion of all California libraries. My question is, how do we do that in California when over 1,100 public libraries are overseen? I think that must include branches, right? Are overseen, funded, and managed by different governing boards and jurisdictional territories. The sheer geographical size and large number of libraries in California means they cannot easily be compared to other states. And service models and projects implemented in other states are not necessarily feasible in this large, complex world of California public libraries. I would be curious to hear Stacy's perspective on the pros and cons of the statewide Hawaii system versus California related to this thought. Thank you all. It's a very dense question. I want to say it's complicated.
It is complicated. Since I was mentioned, I'll jump in. The pros, of course, are that for us in our statute, libraries are mentioned in statute. So when Hawaii was formed as a state, became a state in 1959, they created libraries in statute. And it was acknowledgement of the importance of education and access. If you can get government to be that invested in education and access, then it can be a good thing. But you have to be able to balance all the different cultures. California is a huge state. Even Hawaii with 51 branches, it's good for leveraging resources and ensuring access, and there's a real focus. For California, it's such a large state. I think it could work, but you would have to build in the flexibility for communities to be their communities. So I'm constantly balancing system, island, and locality, and you have to be able to find that balance to be able to support people. So is it possible? I think it could be possible because there's only, what, 182 library jurisdictions in California?
I think, yeah, it was 181 or 182, exactly.
I think you could, or you could even do regions. Region might be a better fit. But I think when people talk about doing that kind of structure, they feel like they'll lose autonomy. So I think it's harder to go from something to something. We went from sort of disparate. We had libraries, we had a county system. It had been a whole bunch of different things, but then they decided to make it a single system. So unless there's impetus for it, I would say it would be difficult just to get over that hurdle of feeling of loss of autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it is difficult when you have all these different governments. The thing that California has that other states don't have, though, is it actually defines library service. So you have several models of how libraries can be funded, but if your community doesn't fund a library, then you have to pay somebody, or your community that has a library can charge to provide that service. That's invaluable for California and the survival of public libraries and the value of libraries. Pennsylvania, they didn't have that. It was Wild West. There's 2,600 municipalities, over 400, I think it's 452 libraries, little tiny libraries with no structure to help define how they were funded or supported. And I think California is ahead of the game because you actually have a model. It is different and they're all different ways, but at least defined.
Yeah.
I think the state library is making some really wonderful decisions lately that really help with this, because they are starting to put forth these statewide things like database offerings that allow us little libraries to stop paying for that and then use our resources locally for what we want. So the more of that, the better. There's some awesome stuff coming with ebooks, and I think that will be amazing. And then, of course, Folsom really benefits from a partnership of libraries with the Sacramento Public Library. So those kinds of local partnerships, I think, just do amazing things for our patrons. And I know that we send out as many books as we get in. So, you know, so we're still helping the cause there. But that, you know, both local and statewide pooling of resources is happening, and it can be scaled up.
That's great. Yeah, that's true. I think there are a couple of other questions, and we're running out of time, but I think these are really pertinent to this discussion. We're talking about the future of libraries. And Mary said, should we be thinking about what government is going to look like in the future? Many of our assumptions about our future are tied to assuming local governments will still be the same in the future. It's a great comment question. And boy, I'd love to hear some thoughts on that.
Well, you know, I think we have to assume government's going to be the same, just in terms of its structure. I mean, government's set up in such a way that it makes it hard to change the structure. So unless there's some really big groundswell to change our government structure, I think it's here to stay. And it's going to have tweaks, I think, here and there. But unless that core function of what America looks like changes, and I kind of hope it doesn't, I think how we're organized is gonna, with government, at least locally and statewide, is gonna stay the same.
I don't mean to go dark, but depending on how elections go, you know, in the future for the United States, there's nothing that guarantees we're going to be 50 states in the future, and that will have a roll down effect potentially. There's a great book by Juan Enriquez called The Untitled States of America.
Yeah.
And he talks about all the ways that we make assumptions that will always be 50 states, but how that could change. So I think there's some wild cards that we have to pay attention to that are going to drive how government changes. Government really is not designed to move fast. One of our former bosses, one of my favorite state librarians, my favorite state librarian who recently passed away, Maurice Trevelyan, from Maryland, he was a futurist. I have to thank him, and thank you, Rivkah, for supporting me in my career down this future, you know, thinking and inspiring me to always be out there thinking. You know, he said that it would be scary if government functioned. It could be very scary if government was efficient, and I think that's potentially true. So I think there's multiple scenarios, and we just really have to watch the signals for what's happening to figure out what we have to consider. So what happens if government from federal level, what if it changes, the states change? At the local level, who's being elected? What changes are happening that are going to drive the decision-making and drive whatever support we currently get from those organizational structures. So I don't think anything is solid. It's just, we do have to be like the Polynesian voyagers. We got to watch the stars, throw out the frigate birds, and pay attention so we can make it a positive future for our communities.
Very well said. Wow, my head is exploding thanks to all of you. Thank you very much. We have about 5 more minutes before we wrap up. There's a question here that I think is it's an interesting one. Again, anonymous. HUD and public housing nonprofits do a very good job of identifying community partners and needs for determining hyper-local and partner-driven services. Do you see public housing as a natural partner for libraries?
I was going to say yes. I think in some larger cities, I think Chicago as well, places, they're building libraries as the ground level of senior and other public housing, and I think that it kind of goes along with my thought of I'd love to see community centers with daycares and things. I think it's a natural fit, especially in high densely populated areas. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I've been dreaming about a daycare center preschool library so we could actually in real time demonstrate the value of early learning. That's something that I would love to see happen. And, you know, their model, I mean, Stockton just down the road from us has a model for that. And I know Susie's very, I don't know if she's on, but is very invested in that. I want to just double check that we have done our best. Actually, there is a question from Angela. 2 questions. Oh boy. Over the past 2 years, Storytimes programs and other children's services have been heavily modified. How do you envision children's and family services in the next 5 or more years? Do you think there'll be big changes?
We've we brought back our story times and we modified them a bit, made them shorter, tried to make them a little bit safer for this, current climate. But I think I try not to hire anybody who won't do a story time. I think that it's one of the most important things we do. So, it's going to change, hopefully more. I want more of them. We were already doing a story time every day we were open, but why not 2? Why not 3?
Right.
The evenings. So I think that I don't know, that's the best part of libraries. And I won't do it. I wouldn't hire me because I'm scared of children, but we've got some really amazing librarians. Oh, and Peter, I got rid of the library master's degree for a requirement. The best youth services librarian I've ever worked with does not have a master's, and she is spectacular. So.
And Chris Brown from Chicago is in the room. Hey, Chris, and just posted something Chicago's doing, which if you read the book Better Together by Robert Putnam years ago, the mayor of Chicago built libraries with a specific footprint to meet community needs. And I saw some of those libraries. It's great. So we have about 1 minute. Peter, since you're the new kid in the room, do you want the last word? Except for me, of course, because I get to
I was going to say, I'm not sure I'm going to get the last word. Sure. I just want to think we've had a fantastic conversation. And I think that, talk about the future of libraries, I think it's bright. I like that. I think the graphic had a light bulb on it, on the thing that was sent out maybe. And I think that is, I think that we as a profession are adaptable and have adapted and will continue to do that. But I think the fact that we're willing to talk about the future and think about it and plan is one of our key strengths. A lot of professions don't do that. Let's talk about, why was Redbox successful and Netflix successful? Because they took their industry and they changed it. And I don't think we're gonna need something as earth-shattering or groundbreaking as that for libraries, but we have to constantly be looking at what the next thing is. And I think these conversations are a great way to make sure that we're doing that. So thank you, Rivkah, for inviting me and organizing this. It's been fantastic.
Well, it's been a dream for a while to have a conversation like this, and there's nothing like leaving your job to do that. Before we sign off, would SPL 2, 3, 4, and SPL turn your cameras on so we can thank you for all the great support and acknowledge you, please? Kathy Crossway, Deputy Director, Public Services. Lisa Martinez, our communications manager. Robert's in the dark. He looks like he's in witness protection. He's been providing tech support. And Jared Keller, Deputy Director, Infrastructure Support and everything, and who's called at 3 a.m, at least 3 times a week. Thank you for making this possible, but most especially, thank you to our panelists. You guys way exceeded there. I had more questions, just not enough time. But I also want to say this was recorded. I believe we can make this available to people who might want to have another listen. And Stacey, from all my heart, thank you for being with us. Even though you're in a different time zone and it's dark 30 for you. And Lori, keep going to the dark side and making us think. And Christy, thank you for everything you do for SPL. And Peter, you're going to have the best time ever. Thank you. See you all later.
Thanks, everyone.
Panelists, stay on for just a minute. Thank you. This was awesome. You need to be doing this like